Sometimes, the most agonizing thing isn't a slap but silence. The quiet, painful confession that lingers unspoken in the presence of someone you love. That day began like any other. The familiar sound of footsteps echoed through the door, followed by the usual, "I'm home," delivered with a forced smile. But on that day, the mask was slipping, revealing what had been concealed behind it for so long. The absence of our wedding photo on the wall wasn't just an empty space. It was a symbol of the slow unraveling of a marriage. You try to avoid the truth for as long as you can, but once you confront it, your world is never the same. It was our 8th year of marriage. Normally, I wouldn't take much notice of the small details around the house. Yet, that morning, my gaze lingered on the empty spot where our wedding photo used to hang. Instead of bringing back memories of that joyous day, it amplified the pain of the present. I exhaled deeply, removed the photo with deliberate care, and set it aside. It wasn't just an empty space. It felt like a scar etched into the past we once cherished. That evening, I heard the lock click, followed by the familiar rhythm of her footsteps and her cheerful greeting. "Honey, I'm home." Her voice carried its usual warmth, but this time, it felt hollow. Without lifting my eyes from the book in my lap, I caught the faint hint of artificiality in her tone. Once, her words had been a source of comfort. Now they weighed heavily in my chest. "I brought you flowers," she said, placing a bouquet on the coffee table. "I know how much you love them." Flowers, once a symbol of affection, now seemed like a grim reminder of something withering. Struggling to endure the bitter irony, I glanced up and forced a smile. "They're beautiful, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice steady, though inside, I was fraying at the edges. She noticed immediately. Her eyes flicked to the wall and landed on the empty spot where our wedding photo once hung. Her face went pale. "Where is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my tone cool. Her gaze sharpened. "What's missing?" The change in her expression was instant, anxiety mingling with anger. "The wedding photo," she said, her voice rising. "Where is it?" She began pacing, her agitation spilling over. "I took it down," I said simply, closing my book and placing it on the table. My calmness seemed to unsettle her even more, chipping away at the fragile facade she'd been clinging to. My words stopped her mid-step. Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Because, Sarah," I replied, my voice measured, each word deliberate. "A photo is supposed to capture a memory. But that photo no longer reflects our reality." Her eyes widened, shock and fear rippling through her. The space between us grew thick with unspoken truths. She stood frozen, her gaze darting around the room as though looking for an anchor, something to steady herself. But there was nothing. She drew a shaky breath, but instead of gathering strength, she seemed to shrink under the weight of it all. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice breaking. "That photo symbolized our beginning," I said, my tone unwavering. "But everything it represented, innocence, promises, sincerity, was a lie." My words hit her like a physical blow. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no sound came. Instead, she swallowed hard, choking on the truth she could no longer deny. Her bright blue eyes, once full of life, were now clouded with helplessness. "How do you know?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. I realized then that she already knew. She had been waiting for someone to say it aloud, to give voice to the truth she had buried deep. "I've known for a long time," I said, my voice steady though the weight of my confession bore down on me. Her legs gave out and she sank to the floor, her hands tangled in her hair, her eyes fixed on the ground, unable to meet mine. I, the words caught in her throat, unable to surface. "You know, Sarah," I said, leaning back in my chair. "At first, I blamed myself. I questioned if I had done something wrong, if I hadn't been the husband you needed or given you the life you deserved. But then, when the truth came out, I realized this was your choice. Something you decided, fully aware, again and again." She covered her face with trembling hands, as if my words were breaking down the walls she had spent years building. But those walls weren't a refuge. They were a prison. "Who?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Does it matter?" I responded, my tone cold. "Will knowing his name somehow fix our broken marriage? Will it erase everything?" "I don't think so." Still, she searched my eyes for an answer. When she realized I wouldn't look away, she took a shaky breath, trying to gather herself. But no matter how much she hoped, the truth wouldn't change. I didn't say anything more. Instead, I reached under the table and pulled out a small box, placing it in front of her. It was plain, tied with a simple string, with nothing flashy to suggest the weight of its contents. "What is this?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "The truth," I replied, "so you can see just how brutal it really is." Her hands trembled as she untied the string and opened the box. The moment her eyes landed on what was inside, her face grew even paler. Bank statements, phone records, hotel reservations, photos from secret meetings. Everything was there, every lie laid bare. "Everything's here, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "Every lie, every secret you tried to hide from me. It's all right in front of you." A soft whimper escaped her lips as her fingers clumsily sifted through the papers. The fear in her eyes deepened. I didn't want it to be like this," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "No," I replied coldly, "but you made it this way. With every choice you made, with every lie you told. This is where we ended up." Something shifted in the room then. Perhaps it was her pride breaking, or the last fragile thread of our marriage snapping. Whatever it was, I could feel it, the final rupture of whatever had held us together. Sarah's gaze remained fixed on the papers, each document forcing her to confront the truth she had been avoiding. Betrayal, deceit, lies. It was all there, laid out in front of her. Tears streaked her cheeks as she whispered, "I didn't mean to hurt you." I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "Is this what not wanting to hurt someone looks like, Sarah?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Months of lies, hidden phones, secret meetings. Was all of this an accident? "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice." Her regret was unmistakable, but it didn't fill the emptiness inside me. No matter how much I had once loved her, all that was left now was the wreckage of what we used to have. "It didn't happen all at once," she said, her voice trembling. "At first, it was just a friendship." She trailed off, unable to finish. "But I didn't need to hear the details. Not anymore." "I don't need the details, Sarah." I cut her off, my voice firm. "I don't care how it started or why it happened. All I know is that this has nothing to do with us anymore." I stood, my movements deliberate. "I decided this morning to leave the house," I said. "I've packed my things. There's no reason for me to stay here." Her face crumpled at my words. "No," she cried, her voice rising in desperation. "You can't do this. After all these years, you can't just walk away." I turned to her, taking in the panic in her eyes. "Can't I?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "This is the hardest thing I've ever done, Sarah. But it's the only thing I can do. Staying here means reliving this pain every single day. And I don't want that anymore." She was shaking now, her lips trembling as she tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I walked toward the door, my hand resting on the knob. Before leaving, I turned to her one last time. "Sarah," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion, "I've learned that I need to love myself the way I once loved you. And loving myself means walking away." I opened the door, and the cool air hit my face. I picked up my suitcase and stepped outside. Behind me, I could hear her sobbing, but it no longer mattered. As I walked, I looked up at the sky. It was bright and clear, yet the storm raging inside me was finally beginning to settle. Deep down, I felt something stir, a small sense of freedom. I had reclaimed control over my life, and that was worth more than anything I was leaving behind. When I climbed into the car, I glanced back at the house one final time. Once, it had been a symbol of my happiness. Now, it was just a structure, heavy with painful memories. I started the engine and drove away. For the first time in what felt like forever, I remembered how to breathe. The air seemed fresher. The sky looked bluer. The pain that had consumed me for so long was being replaced by a quiet sense of relief. The void Sarah left in my life would now be filled with my own freedom. As I said my final goodbye to the past, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone shatter me like this again.